Hello and welcome to another 2024 Candidates Tournament game review. So, after 10 rounds, we have two players leading, and in the 10th round, they had to face off against each other. So, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Domaraju Gukesh. So, hopefully, I pronounced that correctly. But these two players, after 9 rounds, they were to face off. They were tied, and we go into the 10th round. They're facing each other, and look at this accuracy rating. So 97.9 for Nepomniachtchi, and even higher, 98.3 for Gukesh. So they just played some super solid chess. So what can we learn from this game? Even though it was a draw, it's worth taking a look at to see what was going on in this game. So let's check this out. Let's see, make sure there's nothing else to look at here. So it went 40 moves, as you'll see. And it says the game was pretty competitive. White played the opening well, but black was on another level. It was an incredible middle game by both players, and both players had incredible precision in the end game. So 2,900 rating. So Nepomniachtchi played at a 2,900 level, and his opponent played even higher at 2,950. So in the opening, 98.9 versus 100% for Gukesh, and then 96.7 in the middle game versus 97. And then we have 99.6 in the end game versus 99.4. So crazy game, a lot of precision and accuracy. So let's see what happened. Nepomniachtchi starts out with e4, then we have e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn, defending the pawn, bishop to b5, putting pressure on the knight that's covering the pawn. So a6 is played. So we're in the Ruy Lopez. This is a common move, forcing this bishop to either retreat or capture the knight. Now, if the knight was captured, the pawn would recapture, and if White's knight did capture this pawn, black could just attack the knight and pawn and recover. So retreat is played, keeping the bishop pair. Then we have this interesting move. The looks like it's the Cozio defense, where you bring this knight over here to e7 to back up the other knight, and you're kind of blocking your bishop in, but let's see how the game progresses here. So immediately, Nepomniachtchi attacks in the center. So we have a capture, recapture, knight captures, and the queen ends up in the middle here. Now, this knight is able to jump over and attack the queen here. So Nepomniachtchi could give up his bishop pair by attacking the knight and force black to make a decision to capture with the D or the B pawn. If he captured with the D pawn, keeping all his pawns together, well, then there'd be an exchange of queens possibly. But in the game, we had a retreat, and the computer says that is an inaccuracy. That interesting that the computer recommends queen to d3 instead, which I could see, the possibility of the knight harassing the queen. But then, what is the knight going to do after that? The queen could just step over and attack the knight, chasing this knight away. So queen to d3 is recommended as best, which does keep an eye on this half-open file. Potentially you could get the rook over here and create a battery. This also prevents this pawn from pushing forward, and then you could just capture and the queen would be backing it up. Anyway, in the game we had queen to e3 played, bishop develops, getting ready to castle for black, the knight develops, and now castling by black. White, instead of castling, the computer recommends pushing the H pawn, which is a bold move. The pawn could just well, can the pawn be captured? Because then, well, if we go back, if we push that h pawn, giving it up, it could open up the h file for some pressure on black's king side. So in the game, we had knight jumping forward to this outpost, putting pressure on the bishop, covering this pawn, and counterattack. b5 attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats. Now the bishop is lined up through the center and eyeing the king here. So the attack continues. The knight moves forward, attacking white's light squared bishop, and white is attacking black's dark squared bishop. So all of this is ignored by Nepomniachtchi. He just moves his queen over and lines up on the king here. So there's this threat of bringing the bishop up here to h6 and threatening a mate in one. And then what do? He could protect with the bishop, but then the knight could capture, getting rid of the bishop pair, although the knight could capture here as well. And you don't want to push this g-pawn forward if the bishop jumps up here to h7, because then it creates a weakness. Although, well, the real reason is if you push the g-pawn, you can capture the rook. But then we could have the bishop trying to move in there and plug this gap created by a g6 pawn move. All right, moving on. In the game, we had bishop to d6 attacking the queen. This is an inaccuracy. The computer likes an immediate capture of the bishop on b3, getting rid of the bishop pair. So instead, this is what the computer wants to see. But then white would keep a slight edge, capturing towards the center. He's given up his bishop pair, but now he's kind of opened up this, we have a half-open A file, which could lead to some pressure on this A pawn at some point. And maybe a threat to capture this pawn, which is not able to be recaptured at the moment because it's pinned to this rook. So anyway, what could happen after this? Bishop to b7 to prevent any future attack on the b pawn and this pin to the rook. So in the game, bishop to d6, attacking the queen immediately. Nepomniachtchi defends, blocking this attack on the queen. So we have an exchange here. And it looks like the computer actually prefers the knight capture. Now, this probably wasn't played because white wanted to keep his knight in the center here on this outpost, although it could be chased away at some point by c6. But after this, the recommendation is to move the queen out. I don't know. That still looks a little bit tricky. If we move the queen, then what? What if you move the knight here? I don't know. According to the computer, this would be an inaccuracy. Now it's saying it would be better to capture here. So sometimes the computer has difficulty making up its mind. If queen to f6 were played, well then the knight could just jump back here attacking the queen and gaining time. So that is one reason that might not be the greatest move. Also, castling queenside is a recommendation. All right, let's go back to the game. So the queen captures. We have d6 being played to let this bishop out along this diagonal. So now castling attack on the knight in the center here. So rook centralizes, keeping an eye, backing up that knight, eyeing this half-open d file. We have black moving his rook to the half-open e file. And now the recommendation is to just drop back here with the knight. But we have Pawns being pushed on the h-file. Once again, capturing this bishop on b3 is recommended by the computer. So here we have an interesting move. The rook is moved out to the d file, then it moves up here to d3, where it can reposition back over to g3 and help in this attack on the king side. And it also, well, that's the main idea, is bringing this rook up here, swinging it over where it can eye the king side. So c5 is played, threatening to fork these pieces, trap the bishop. What should Nepomniachtchi do here? Well, he swings over. Computer now is saying this is an inaccurate move. So c3 would have been better. So let's take a look at that real quick. So c3, the best move. Now you think, well, what if this is played? Forking the bishop and the rook, which the computer says is a great move. Well, now you have rook to g3 here. So rook to g3, bishop captures on d5 would be best. So what this move does is threaten a capture and then a capture by the queen and threaten a mate on g7. So it's starting to look dangerous, but the game is even here according to the computer. After capture by the bishop, then recapture, and then c takes b3 here. So pretty crazy. Now we would capture, threatening a mate. g6 could be played to stop that. And now rook captures, and then the queen captures. So now what do we have? King to h8 or f8. If they go to h8, you could just move back and forth. So, maybe you try this. But we have queen to h6, the only move that works. Because the black queen is guarding f6. So check. If we have a move. Now this is pretty tricky. If we have a move to e7, there's an actual mate in one. So if the king goes to e7, the queen can jump up here to g7 with a mate. So basically it would be a draw. The queen would just chase the king around. The king cannot try to escape, or there would just be a mate over here on queen to g7. So back to the game. We had an immediate rook to g3, and now it looks like king to f8 would be the best response. So instead we have king to h8, which is still excellent, and the computer is showing the game is even. So moving on, now we must move forward to give this bishop room to escape. The knight finally captures, getting rid of the bishop, capture towards the center here, opening this A file for the rook, and more trading of pieces. So now we have this pawn blocking, kind of restricting this D pawn on D6. The queen moves forward, connecting the rooks, and this pawn pushes forward, forcing black to decide what to do here. Do you ignore it? Does black capture, or does he push forward? Well, he trades off, and the queen captures. So now white has gotten rid of his doubled pawns, and he's left with this pawn here, which now is under attack by this rook move. So the queen swings back, centralizing in this position. The computer actually liked this c4 pawn push, but now we have a opportunity to trade the queens off here. So what will Nepomniachtchi do? Well, he ignores that, brings his rook to the center, backing up his queen, and now the rook takes the 7th rank here, threatening this pawn. So now we have a trade of the queens. After this recapture, we have the pawn pushing forward, leaving this backward pawn on an open, or excuse me, half open C file. So the rook swings in behind the pawn, and now we have the other rook grabbing the open E file here. So the king moves forward, the rook jumps up here, infiltrating black's position. So, what does black do next? He doubles up his rooks, both of them targeting this C pawn. So in response, white just moves over, aiming at the A6 pawn. So very important in these endgames is to keep your rooks active. It probably wouldn't have been so great if white would have just kept his rooks back here defending this backwards pawn. Instead, he ignores that weakness and targets black's weakness. So capture, trade, and then a capture. And now this rook is attacking the D6 pawn. So black moves up, targeting this pawn. Capture, capture, and another important maneuver. Moving your rook behind the passed pawn here. So black retreats, targeting the king and driving the king into the corner, and the pawn starts marching. So now white returns the favor by marching his pawn forward. So here we just have black abandoning his pawn, going after this pawn that's marching up the board. So trade of pawns, and the game ended here after h5, h4 keeping space even on the king side, and then g6. So here the players just agreed to a draw. Material is even. And so that ended the battle in round 10 of this candidates tournament. Gukesh Nepomniachtchi tied with 6 points out of 10, and I believe behind them are quite a few players with Caruana, Nakamura, maybe Prague. There are multiple players, but I encourage you to get on ChessBase or Google the 2024 chess candidates tournament and just take a look at some of these games. So even though this was a draw, it was a highly accurate game. If we go back to this review and take a look at this, they played at 2900 and 2950 level, even though they are 2700 players. And the accuracy rating was pretty impressive here, 97.9 versus 98.3. So definitely take a look at some of these games because you can always learn from these great players, from their strategies and little tactics. So a lot going on in this game, even though it was a draw. All right, well, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for those that haven't already. Feel free to leave comments, suggestions, or requests for any chess videos you'd like to see in the future. Thank you, and have a super chess day.